through 55, the servant songs. This is a response to Barry Isaac, who had a question in response to someone's post about Isaiah chapter 52, 13 through 53 as not being messianic, and how the New Testament writers kind of did what they wanted with that text. And so what I'm going to do is just give a brief overview of Isaiah chapter 52 through 53. Just a survey of its usage in the New Testament and its Second Temple Judaism, or Rabbinic Judaism's understanding of the first century. And then I want to do a few videos on Isaiah 49. I'm going to do right now, as that's my favorite chapter in Isaiah 43, Isaiah 49. What we're going to see is that Isaiah 49 and Isaiah 53, a lot of these passages are parallel passages, in that Gitzra Shara, I forget how to pronounce it, the Quran community, their Midrash, they developed the Midrashic Jewish interpretation, and that's one of the methods, is that you take two passages of scripture that have similar vocabulary, thematic, in agreement, and you put them together. And that's what they would do with like Isaiah 53, verse 2, and Isaiah 11, verse 1 through 4, because that's where you have the shoot, the root of Jesse. So they're similar passages, and we see this being done by the New Testament writers right away. Pentecost, Acts chapter 2. What does Peter do? 2 Samuel 7 and Psalm chapter 2. And then we see other passages that are put together in that method. But the history pretty much, it goes back to the Quran community, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the late 1940s, 1948, I think. But anyway, they developed these interpretation methods, and they looked at Isaiah 53 as messianic. So this is to Barry Isaacs, that Isaiah 52 through 53 was messianic in belief before Christianity in Second Temple Judaism. So that needs to be understood. And they use the Pesher method of interpretation that they developed, that, hey, we're the remnant community, we're the elect community of this sovereign God who has elected us to go through this suffering of messianic woes, and then we'll be delivered and rescued from exile, returned to the land, that type of deal. And that's what we see with the calls of Seventh-day Adventist Church reads himself into Bible prophecy, Revelation 12:17. The remnant of her seed, the remnant of the woman, which is Israel. They say, well, that's the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society does the same thing. So it's kind of accommodative language. And so Barry was concerned, well, what about the New Testament writers? Well, they utilize these methods of interpretation, Midrashic, and they would have different literary forms. That's just the way it is. In Messianic belief in the first century, there was divergence, but there were similarities in a lot of cases. There's even an early Targum of Isaiah chapter 53. And we see in the wisdom of Solomon it being mentioned. The righteous man, that's the Messiah. So this really goes back right before Christianity. That Isaiah 53 is messianic, and they used Isaiah 53 accommodatively, Pesher interpretation, and we see it in Daniel 11:13 and Daniel 12:3, which Daniel 12:3 is brought in by Paul in Ephesians chapter 5 and 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, in speaking of the new age, the dawning of the age of light, in comparison to the sons of darkness were of the kingdom of light. So let me see here. I just wrote down a few notes here. But yeah, the messianic woes they believe that they would go through, and this is what we see with Paul in Romans chapter 1, verse 1. Paul says, "I am a slave, a servant," and some would say, like Ben Witherington and a lot of the people, Horsley, that they would have this social interpretation of that. That well, he's that's empire language. The slave master literary form. But no, this is coming from Isaiah chapter 49. That he is a slave, he's a servant, and that's comparable to Galatians chapter 1:15 and following. That he is a servant. He and we see this. He's a bondservant, and he was one born in due time, and he was called, elected, part of, and this is monotheistic Judaism, election, and so this is Isaiah 49. The same as in Romans chapter 8. In Romans chapter 8, Paul has Isaiah chapter 49, Isaiah chapter 11, same as Romans chapter 1, verse 3 and 4. He is of the seed of David, and that he was raised by the Spirit of holiness in power, dunamis. And so we see Isaiah 11, we see Jeremiah 23, we see all these passages that speak of the branch. Zechariah chapter 6, which I developed quite a bit in Hebrews chapter 7, 14 through 8, verse 2 years ago. I was writing an article on it and I didn't finish, but I just sent it to Jeff Cunningham. It's about 28 pages on Zechariah 6. But we see this branch, he's of the seed. And we see this in Romans chapter 8. We see Isaiah 53, verse 2, the seed, in Romans 1, verse 3. Yet, in Romans chapter 8, verse 33 and 34, Paul talks about where we're sheep being slaughtered. He's quoting from Isaiah chapter 53. They're parallel passages anyway, and I'm going to develop that when I'm going on Brian Simmons' podcast. I was supposed to go on Thursday there, but circumstances wouldn't allow. But I will be developing Romans chapter 1, 1 through 7, you could say 1 through 5, and showing the recapitulation through Romans into chapter 8, parallel, resurrection, renewal, restoration, the Roman road, and how it refutes dispensationalism and full preterism wholeheartedly. Now let's see here. Romans. In the Second Temple belief, they did hold the servant songs as messianic. Overall, they all agreed that it referred to exile, the destruction of the pagan nations, and probably the return to the land, I would imagine. But we see Isaiah chapter 53 is parallel in a lot of cases to Isaiah chapter 49, which I have done quite a bit of writing on. I was writing a manuscript. It was 140 some pages on the covenantal promises Israel's covenantal promises contained in the Abrahamic, Davidic, and New Covenants, but I broke them down into articles. Exegete in Romans chapter 10, Acts chapter 13, Acts chapter 2, 2 Corinthians 2 through 7. So we see Isaiah 49, and it's coupled that Geserer Shewa, I can't pronounce it at this hour, but combining verses together. And Isaiah chapter 49, I'm going to develop quite a bit in the next video, as we're going to go to Romans. It's used in Romans chapter 1, Romans chapter 8, Romans chapter 10, Romans chapter 15, Acts chapter 13, 2 Corinthians, and what else? That's for another video though. But we'll be doing some actual exegesis instead of a survey of what's pertaining to Isaiah chapter 53. And so this is the Messianic woes that they believed, that certain groups, certain part of the Quran community believed in the Messianic woes. And this is something that Paul believed, Christ believed, the Messianic woes. Christ said, let this cup pass from me. It was the cup of trembling. And I've done a video on this when it comes to penal forensic atonement. We see the cup of God's wrath in the prophets, in Jeremiah chapter 51, in Ezekiel, in Isaiah chapter, 51, I believe as well. The cup of God's trembling on the nations, on Judah, on Babylon, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the cup of his wrath, the cup of his trembling. We see in Revelation chapter 14, the whore, Babylon, the great city. The cup was poured in full strength. It was not diluted. It was full strength. It wasn't watered down a wine. It was poured out in full strength. And so that's what we see in the Garden of Gethsemane. Let this cup pass from me. But they had to drink that cup too, the disciples. It's intense persecution, they believed. Then they would be vindicated, and then they would be restored, and the promises would be restored to Israel. Especially, of course, the land promise. The land promise, then you have the Davidic covenant, the temple, all of that good stuff. Let me see here. But yeah, the next video I'm going to go through Isaiah chapter 49 and do a brief thematic and exegetical comparison of how Paul utilized Isaiah chapter 49. As I've written quite a bit on that, and I've done a few videos on that, but it's very, very fascinating. So yeah, overall, Barry, there's no need to worry. The New Testament writers, Paul used different literary techniques, emphasize different aspects of Midrash than Jesus, than the apostles, and they have similarities, they have differences, because they have different audiences, different different things they need to address, but they all agreed that Isaiah chapter 53 is messianic, and this is even before Christianity, heavily in Judaism, of the intertestamental period. But our next video we'll be doing Isaiah chapter 49, going through that song. And the servant songs overall, they're debated. Okay, some will say, like, you have Isaiah chapter 40, then Isaiah chapter 43, 49, 42, 52 through 53. Some say, well, Isaiah 41's in there, Isaiah 44. So, some servant songs are for the nation. Some